right, guys, it is happening in the world of MMA, and one of my best friends in the game is back on the program. You know him from his amazing work on Morning Combat, of course, his live chat, and much, much more. The one and only Luke Thomas. LT, welcome to the program, man.
Happy to be back. Thank you for having me.
So, LT, what's it like, do you think, to go into a mosh pit with Conor McGregor at a Limpbizkit concert?
Well, first you're at a Limpbizkit concert. That's a choice. I've actually seen them in concert, which is funnily enough.
So have I.
Do you remember? And that was in college. Do you remember when they did the Napster tour? Do you remember that? Do you remember Napster? Do you know Napster?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
so
yes.
For the donks who don't know, this was like the original place when MP3s were invented as a technology. They went to this place called Napster, which was just giving all these songs away for free. Lars Ulrich sued them. It was a whole thing. Okay. All right. Anyway, as like a protest to that, they did like a summer tour that was supposed to be free. They ended up putting a cage in front of Limpbizkit as like an insurance thing, so people would just like constantly throw stuff at them. But the tour was basically free for as long as it lasted. Anyway,
that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. I went to a Limpbizkit concert once, and Wes Ball, the guy with the face paint, which I think is probably one of the more talented dudes in the band, gave me his guitar pick. That was something.
I did see. I you know what? I mean, I'm embarrassed that I went to a Limpbizkit concert, but you know, I was 20 something. I mean, you know, I was
chocolate starfish and hot dog flavored water. People don't know the power of that album.
There's only one good song on that album, which is the Air Assault, or Air Urban Assault remix of Rollin' that has Method Man, Redman, and DMX on it. Ain't never been shit. Ain't gonna be shit. That's why I take shit whenever I see shit. Remember that line? That's a great one. So anyway, I know I've heard these songs a million times, but anyway, this is the true story. Last thing, I forget what song it was. I couldn't even tell you what. I don't remember the nature of the song, but I'll never forget. It had like this really intense mosh pit, and there was this dude like right at the edge of it, you know, because the mosh pit, you could sort of see where it begins and ends. Yeah. And there was this dude, and he wasn't moshing with anybody in the actual pit itself, just people on the edge. And this was in like I don't know if it was Hampton, Virginia. I actually can't remember where it was, but it doesn't matter. There was a big old dude that was sitting at the end there who got sick of it. And I'll never forget. He got bumped into one too many times, and he grabbed the kid by his ponytail and his belt, and then just chucked him into the middle of the fray. And I never saw that kid at any point after that. I mean, he literally just like yesterday's garbage, just
threw him off the face of the earth. Did you do the death circles as well, Luke? Or are you more of a mosh pit?
No, I don't do any. I didn't really do any of that stuff. I mean, those are all, you know, if you want to get punched in the face, there's better ways to go about it, you know. I mean, I did a couple in my time, but you know, no.
Well, speaking of getting punched in the face, man, what about Ilia Topuria puts out this tweet? When we announce it, you won't believe it. Get ready. What could this be, LT? What do you think this could be? Sure, is he talking about Islam? Because I mean, I think we would believe it, right? We've been talking about it for a while now.
Yeah, so there's basically three answers to that question. Okay, one is Islam, and to your point, I think we would all greet this news with smiles and jubilation, but it would not exactly serve as a surprise. Okay. So then the other answer that I've seen proffered is, well, it'd be Conor McGregor. Now I'm skeptical of this for any number of reasons, not least of which is he can't make 155. I mean, not anytime soon anyway.
And he's out of the testing pool, right? Would they be able to?
I'm not sure what his status in the testing pool is at this point, but it's irrelevant. I mean, does anyone sort of consider him a serious contender for? I mean, I can't rule out a fight this year, but you know, we're already into the end of the first quarter, heading into the second, and we haven't even heard a peep about him returning. So that's possible, but that seems unlikely. And then the last one is it's either some kind of precursor for a shitcoin rug pull, or he's signed some kind of sponsorship and or television deal relevant to, I don't know, Spain or something. I know he's tweeting here in English, but nevertheless, you know, to generate a mass audience of some kind. I don't know. It's hard to know what could be announced that we wouldn't even be thinking of. That would be interesting given who's available, because obviously at UFC 314, we've got a lot of those featherweights, for example, that are busy, and we kind of have a sort of a sense of what's happening at 155, except for Justin Gaethje, kind of an X factor. You see what I'm saying? It's hard to know among any of the relevant. I mean, could they bring back Nate Diaz or something? But even then, could he make 155? It's just, I don't really get it. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and imagine it's like you vacate your belt to fight Nate Diaz at 155.
Well,
like,
I mean, would you hate? So I mean, I'm literally just theorizing or something. I'm not giving any inside info. Would you hate that fight? I wouldn't hate that fight. I mean, I wouldn't. It wouldn't be the one I pick. It wouldn't be the one I pick. But like,
yeah. I mean, it makes money. It's interesting. You and BC, you guys did an excellent morning combat just the other day. You were talking a little bit about like the loss of star power and how the UFC is kind of feeling a little bit like a machine sometimes, some of the excitement gone. It's interesting as well, the Alex Pereira losing. Do you think there's more pressure on the UFC to get Ilia Topuria back into the mix, right? Like this is one of their last remaining big stars. Obviously puts pressure, maybe giving a bit more money to John Jones to make this Tom Aspinall fight happen now that Alex Pereira is out of the mix. But then do you think the UFC goes back and goes, all right, let's get this guy in motion here, maybe 155, because we need stars fighting for our organization?
Yeah, there's simply no question. Making effective use out of Ilia Topuria is a huge deal. There's a really good video, if you guys haven't seen it, by MMA On Point, or maybe it's called On Point MMA. I'm not sure. The Twitter handle is in contrast to potentially the name, but it's a great YouTube channel. And the guy who runs it, or there's many people who play a key role, but Jason is kind of the lead figure there. He made a video talking about how UFC champions and basically like the UFC ranked fighters have never been older than they are now. But what's interesting about that is that's not really exclusive to MMA. Athletes in general are aging. It's much more pronounced in MMA, and especially in certain MMA weight classes. But it's sort of a broader figure. But the point I'm trying to make is that creates a series of interesting opportunities because guys can maintain a public profile much longer than perhaps we would expect them, right? You got guys like Poirier and Gaethje, we just mentioned, who had a big win and might get, in fact, a title shot. And these guys are in their late in the latter half, anyway, of their 30s. Topuria is interesting because what is he, 29? What does he stand at today? 28, 29? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Double check that for me because I don't want to give fake news here. I want to make sure that we have accurate information. But my assumption...
28.
Yeah, 28. This is what I mean.
CNN of MMA. We make sure we double check our facts.
Okay, so this is what I mean.
Sure.
28 years old, and I know he's not a champion now, but is essentially like, of that ilk. He just walked away. You've got a guy in his late 20s who did the thing, who overturned the established order in that moment where most UFC champions of the past were able to have the exact same kind of thing, which is happening less now. Guys are breaking through a little bit later. You've got a guy who is, who can speak a language in a huge market in Europe, obviously could do the same thing here, has a dynamic style, and has all the thirst in the world for the biggest fights. He just seems ready-made, and he's got the wind at his back in terms of age. He's a special case for a lot of reasons, but perhaps the fact that he's in his late 20s, to me, makes it the most important that you absolutely strike while the iron is hot. And you could actually, I don't know what the ceiling is on Topuria's global popularity or as an attraction that sells pay-per-views, but I feel like we haven't even really scratched the surface of it.
I'm just asking this because we're coming off the back of a Pereira loss, and even though it hasn't absolutely destroyed where he stands, I think some of us are surprised how we feel about it because we were talking about, hey, will he go to heavyweight regardless of what happens, and blah, 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 blah. Now he's lost. So we're like, actually, nah, he probably needs to do this rematch. And we don't want to see him at heavyweight until this whole thing gets figured out. So I ask you about Topuria. If he goes up and fights Islam Makhachev and Makhachev goes out there and wipes the floor with him, how much do you think that could potentially hurt his star power / perception in the MMA community?
I think that would be really bad. I think that would be an epic disaster for him. You walked away from a weight class where you had not just achieved great things and were undefeated, but still had many potential rivals that you had to, at least in theory, or possibly vanquish, right? I mean, again, I'm not sure that he would have. All great things come to an end, but you had fights set up for you against potentially Yair Rodriguez. By the way, they had animus. And then you can go down the list. Diego Lopez, another fight with Volk or whatever. There's just so many different opportunities there. He walked away from that to go to 155. Now, granted, it's not like losing at 55 to the number one guy in the sport and the champion is some kind of disreputable act. But his whole point in leaving the other weight class was to do dominant things in the next one. If you get the floor wiped with you, that tells you there's a bit of a ceiling that you're kind of up against, and You didn't leave 45 because there was no challenges left. He left 45 because he didn't want to make the weight cut. And again, maybe it really is bad for him. Only he really knows that. But that's not what happened to Volk. Volk was like, okay, well, things were a bit of a disaster trying to fight this guy. Ultimately, in the end, anyway, first fight was a little bit more competitive, obviously. And so he could at least go back to 45. He's like, all right, well, that experiment didn't work, but I can still go back there now. And there's a thing. Now, maybe he could go back to 45. I don't know if he would want to do that. I think he'd probably want to stick it out at 55 because, again, losing to Islam doesn't mean you couldn't beat other great lightweights. But, yeah, dude, that would be bad. That would be real harmful for his stock, and that'd be real harmful for the UFC's opportunity to turn Topuria into what I think he could be, which is a global superstar.
And they need one right now. Let me ask you, in terms of fights and things happening at 155, Justin Gaethje, right? He wants this title shot with Islam. He's campaigning for it now. If he mentioned if he had a perfect night, he could potentially beat him at the post-fight press conference. Do you believe that if a perfect Justin Gaethje shows up, he could beat Islam Makhachev if these guys do fight next?
I would phrase it as you have to accept that MMA is an inherently volatile and risky activity. I don't mean risky for your health, but risky in terms of the certainty with which you can predict outcomes, right? And Justin is a dangerous opponent, and if you are not careful, there is, obviously a realistic probability that he could win. But I think, it would be like, what would be the circumstance where you would pick him over Islam? I don't know what that would be, unless Islam was coming in on 24 hours notice, unless he was coming off of like a devastating knockout loss, or some kind of way to handicap him. That's the only way in which I could ever see the scales being tilted, while recognizing, again, that MMA is difficult and inherently volatile and chaotic, and upsets do happen. I'm giving sort of the boilerplate standard contractual language, like, in the event of blah, 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 blah. But is that what I think would happen under 99 out of 100 scenarios? No, I don't. I think Islam beats him either on the feet or on the ground. I think Islam is that good. And, we're talking about a guy who doesn't have just a range of offensive capability, but including and especially around areas of known weaknesses for Justin Gaethje, but also is defensively one of the most sound fighters in all of the UFC. I'm not in any way going to pick against Islam, as much as I think, to your point, that was a great win for Justin Gaethje at UFC 313 and certainly restorative. He's a dangerous opponent, but no.
From Islam's perspective, why take the Ilia Topuria fight, right? You got Justin Gaethje, proven lightweight. Obviously, they've got a friendship there behind the scenes. They've got similar management. Or fight an Ilia Topuria moving up from featherweight. I've heard his team say it like a million times before. We go out there, we don't look that great against Ilia. This is a guy moving up from a division. Doesn't look great for us. We go out there and beat him. People expect us to smoke him. If it does come down to Islam, I mean, him and his camp do have some pull with the UFC, right? They are an important piece of the puzzle. Why wouldn't they just choose Justin Gaethje?
I think that they might. There's a few probably factors in play, which is who's going to headline International Fight Week? Is it going to be John Jones? Are they going to be able to get that done? And if not, now you're in a question where, okay, do you want to pull potentially the Islam card? So now we got an Islam fight. Who are we going to put there? You could put the Gaethje fight with Islam at International Fight Week, but I don't think that has. By the way, I think it's a big fight. Yeah. By the way, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want to sit here and sound like the guy that says, "Oh, Islam Makhachev versus Justin Gaethje." I don't care about that. I would care about that as much as I gave a very contractual, cover your ass kind of answer for his. Well, in terms of the realistic nature of his, chance of success. At the same time, he is dangerous. What Justin Gaethje fight is not fun. I mean, just say it. Which one? Show me which one down the list sucked. Like, this is not like he's allergic to that. So at a bare minimum, you just know whatever way it would end for him, it would end, spectacularly by hook or by crook, by sword or by shield. It's going to end violently one way or the other. So I'm okay by that. But
and Islam, I feel like Islam's becoming a bit of a draw as well. Like, we're getting to a point now where it's like Islam's coming in, Let's just see what happens now. You know what I mean? Let's see him.
Yeah, dude.
I feel like
Islam
people are
has
getting behind him now. Yeah.
people are so wrong about Islam. Islam has been a star. It took I don't think he is the star that Nurmagomedov was. That's really not the case at all. But Nurmagomedov is responsible for at least being one half of the greatest selling pay-per-view in UFC history and arguably its greatest rivalry, right? Or, feud is maybe a better word to put it, because like, do lions and gazelles have a rivalry? No, not really. I mean, that's they have a feud, but it's one-way traffic, right? So that's kind of the way I feel about the way. Okay, but here's my point. I'll tell a little story. So I sometimes do breakdowns of main events on my YouTube channel. I do them less these days because the UFC is a copyright bully, and they make any kind of even totally legal use of their material a very difficult proposition to work with. But back before they did that, one of the guys who would draw the biggest audiences all the time was Islam. Like Islam, there was massive appetite after he beat Charles Oliveira, for example, for people like, holy, what just happened here? And then after both Volk wins, there was still an enormous online appetite. And I kind of got the sense, I was like, oh, okay, there's something else here. And much more than Poatan, much more than Ilia Topuria, much more than Yuri Prochazka or DDP. And these would be high performers too, by the way. These are not nothing. These would be high performers. And Islam, at least for me, and again, this is quite anecdotal, but it was a window into a moment where I saw like he was like 4 or 5x outperforming those guys, right? Like a vast difference. And I began to realize I don't know exactly how popular he is within the United States. But what I can say is, A, it's pretty popular. B, I think globally he's also a really big superstar. And then I think in some of these other key markets that they can go to, Abu Dhabi, now Saudi Arabia, whatever, they can really market him as obviously a Muslim fighter. And that's an important way and designation to make a big splash in those parts of the world. So like, there's just been, I've noticed there's a huge appetite for Islam, but to the point that you raise, as good as or as well received as a Justin Gaethje fight against Islam might be, it's simply not as big, and it doesn't even carry necessarily the same kinds of stakes that an Ilia Topuria fight would. And so I think they're obviously going to try and get the most razzle dazzle out of what they can get, but at the same time, they don't want to be leveraged. So we just really have to see how the different actors here play their hand.
Yeah, so many factors. There's the welterweight thing with Bilal and JDM, but then it's like second belt, but that would be against JDM. That's nowhere near as big as a fight with Ilia, right? But then I think their camp wants to see Ilia beat someone at 155 first to establish himself as more of a sort of credible challenger. So anyway, all sorts of stuff playing out. And then this whole John Jones, Tom Aspinall stuff happening behind the scenes. Who knows? Maybe they do Justin Ilia in the main event for International Fight Week co-main. You put your Ilia, Charles fight or something underneath there. And that would be a huge fight too. So a lot of different factors at play in the background. Let me just quickly ask you before we get off 155. On Uncrowned, Rafael Fiziev telling Ariel Helwani that 145 is a possibility. Apparently the weight cut at 12 days notice wasn't too bad for him to lightweight. And he's flirting with the idea of moving down to featherweight. My question to you, Luke, how would a 145 Fiziev do, you think, in the UFC?
I think he'd do extremely well. I don't know how easily he can make this cut. So there's a huge caveat there. But you saw it in the first Gaethje fight, and you saw it in this fight too. He looked noticeably smaller than Gaethje. He had a big-ass head, and his head was maybe the same size as Gaethje's. But his body, while still being ripped, was just naturally visibly smaller on camera. And I was like, man, I didn't think of it before, but I was like, maybe he can make 45. To hear this is simply no surprise. So assuming he can make it in a reasonably healthy way, that's obviously a big if, I think he'd be a dynamic addition to 45. This is what I mean about Ilia Topuria going to 55. It's like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? There's so much interesting stuff for you here to do at 45. They might bring Aaron Pico over. They just brought Patricio Pitbull over. And I know he has to get past Jair, and that's a huge if, but I'm still saying there's just a lot of movers and shakers at 145. It's one of the marquee, if not the marquee division, both in terms of star power and exciting fights, the kinds of fights that are memorable and highly technical. Like 145 is so special, and he just bounced, and we're like, who's he going to fight? And, Islam doesn't even, Islam might take it, but to your point, does he even want that? It's not even altogether clear that he even wants that. So I really hate it. But anyway, Fiziev at 45, I actually think he could do super well down there, and I'd be all in favor of him doing it with a responsible weight cut.
Yeah, and the guy's in the prime of his career, so I want to see him get back in there and get his opportunities, because I know he couldn't get a fight for a really long time. But fighting and training in Thailand, right, doesn't hurt your weight cut. It's super hot in there. Anyone who's ever been down there, just walking down the street.
Have you been to Thailand?
Of course, my friend. I live here in Melbourne. That's where we all go. We.
Oh, is that right? That's where all the Aussies go. They go and
Bali and Thailand. You hear loud Aussie accents being like, "Oh, mate, what's going on over there?" And you're like, oh, "Here we go."
I haven't been. It's so the problem in
full of Russians and Australians.
Russians and Australians. I mean, here's the issue: is like, dude, as an American, like, we don't get any time off. Like, you know, the United States, the average American worker works more in terms of hours per week, with less time off than any other labor force in any modern economy in the world. We don't get hardly any time off here. And then on top of it, it's like, dude, it's like a day and a half to get there. You just have, there's no time. I have no time to go see.
It's far away, to be honest with you. It gets a bit wild down there. But my friend Frank Hickman with the Bang Tao MMA over there, and Alex Volkanovski both own a gym over there. So if you ever pop down there, definitely check that out. They get crazy names down there, like Tyson Fury was there, Anderson Silva, GSP. All these people come through the gym there. So it's
actually was there.
Yeah, and actually a great workout holiday for the younger guys. Maybe not you and me, Luke, but a good Muay Thai holiday to have a bit of fun. Speaking of Muay Thai, man, one of the best to do it in Alex Pereira. It's been a few days now since this loss. I got to ask you, man, it looks like we're going into this rematch with Ankalaev next for both guys. Well, your feel right now on it, if you had to pick it right now, who do you think wins this rematch?
This is tough because I thought Ankalaev could do it before the fight, but that he wouldn't. He would just mess it up. And then he goes in because he's made a series of errors previously.
He was on the dunk team for you and Brian.
Yeah, we called him Donkalaev. I mean, we really had a whole thing going for him, you know. And then to his credit, and to, you know, and we just have to say it, we were wrong. We were wrong. He didn't mess it up. He performed very ably. Like, even if you wanted to score at rounds 1, 3, and 5, okay, 1 was a round for Poatan, pretty clear, I thought. Round 5, I thought he won, Poatan as well. 3 is still at best a swing round. I mean, it's very, very, very close. You know, even if you want to pick it for Poatan, you can't say Ankalaev fought bad. He didn't fight bad. He fought great. All right, he didn't get the takedowns, but it turned out he didn't really need them. And in the second round, dude, he styled on Poatan. I couldn't believe how good he was looking in the second round. And so the fact that he was able to have that, plus, you know, he didn't make errors. Was he overwhelming? No, he was not overwhelming. But he was consistently good. He was consistently mixing up his offense. And he had, dude, like, understand something about who Ankalaev is. I still believe at his core, if you can pressure him enough, he will make bad decisions. I do believe that. Did he look under pressure to you in that fight?
Not at all.
Like, it was Poatan who looked under pressure in that fight. Exactly. Poatan was never like, you got to put, again, very easy for me to say this. I'm simply saying, unless you can meet these objectives, he's going to be a lot harder to beat. You had that guy just flowing, high, low, circling, controlling the lead hand. He had a good game plan, and he executed on it almost without error, and certainly no costly error. So you really have to give him a lot of credit. At the same time, you look at what Poatan did, and you're like, well, he stuffed all 12 takedowns. He had a little trouble extracting his back off the fence. I do think that's something he has to work on. But the reality is, he just didn't let his hands go. If you go back and look at the UFC statistics from Fight Metric, he only targeted the head, not even landed, but just targeted the head in terms of the overall proportion of his strikes to the head, body, and legs. 14%. 14%. I mean, he couldn't make effective contact with Ankalaev but for the legs. I mean, I feel like this is at once a correctable mistake, and at the same time, like, man, you were like really far off here a little bit. I mean, again, I know he was close in terms of the scorecards, but in terms of delivering Poatan's trademark offense, he seemed pretty far from that. So it's hard for me to answer this question because I was really wrong the first time, and I don't know if I'm overcorrecting, but I'm just going to say, I guess it's Ankalaev's fight to lose, to be honest with you. I think that the nature of how, I'm not going to say easy, it's certainly not that, but the nature of how comfortable he looked through the course of 25 minutes, even in rounds where he didn't necessarily win, that's a lot. That's actually really a lot. And I feel like Poatan can make the adjustments to get a win in the rematch. Absolutely. He got this close to begin with. But at the same time, did he look like himself? I don't think he did. Even if he had won that, he would have done that by the skin of his teeth. So I guess Ankalaev deserves to be the considered favorite here.
All right, guys, I just want to thank Manscaped for making sure Submission Radio is still around and pumping out the content for you. As you know, there's a lot of costs that go into making this program, and Manscaped makes it possible for me to bring the show to you. And what about this? The best grooming tools for men in the world. You go to manscaped.com/submission right now. Get your code word submission, 20% off and free shipping. I want to bring attention to the Manscaped Beard and Balls bundle. It has you covered from cheek to cheek. It's time to weed whack, hedge trim, and make sure the lawn is looking manicured for the season, because nothing says fresh start like a sharp beard, and more importantly, a properly landscaped lawn. Join over 12 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and use the code word submission, 20% off and free shipping right now. The Beard Hedger keeps your beard crisp like a freshly bloomed flower, while the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra clears out the underbush, because confidence grows best with the right tools. You get customizable trimming, the skin-safe technology designed to minimize nicks and irritation. And what about the long-lasting power? Enjoy up to 60 minutes of runtime with the Beard Hedger and 75 minutes with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. It's waterproof design. Both devices feature waterproof design, and you can get it risk-free now. Manscaped offers a 30-day money-back guarantee. Manscaped.com right now. Use the code word submission. Get 20% off and free shipping today. And don't forget to share it on socials with us. I'll be sharing all of your purchases through our Instagram stories, so make sure to tag us at Submission Radio. And thanks for supporting the program. And guys, I also want to talk to you about SAILY. SAILY supports this show as well with its beautiful eSIM, one of the best eSIMs on the market today. Don't line up at the airport having to change out your SIM cards. If you sign up to these local plans that lock you in for a month at a time, are you kidding me? Forget that. SAILY is so simple. Look at this right now. I jump on the app, I choose my location, I choose my plan, and boom, I am ready to go. You can use one SAILY account for all sorts of destinations. Don't create a new account every time you go somewhere else. It's cheap, it's easy. It gives you the amount of data that you need, and you get an ad blocker on there and threat protection, so it protects you from malicious malware as you travel the world. As you connect to all of these different Wi-Fis, be protected with SAILY. It is the best in the business, and I just want to tell you guys right now, you can support the show and yourself by going online and using the code word submission at SAILY, or go to SAILY.com/submission, or click the link in the description below. You get 15% off your first purchase. That's 15% off your first purchase, and you guys can try it right now. Go to SAILY.com/submission now. Support this show. Every single purchase makes it possible for SAILY to keep supporting this program and keeps the show coming out. Even more importantly, keeps you protected in all that travel. So go to SAILY.com right now /submission. And now back to the program.
A lot of surprises in that fight. Like, for example, like you mentioned, Pereira not being as offensive. Pereira, when he moves backwards in this fight specifically, wasn't really sort of building towards a counter, wasn't sort of trying to trap Ankalaev as he came in. And then Ankalaev just being able to go through the middle like that. I mean, we already knew that Pereira didn't have much head movement. He has that wide guard because he's more of a kickboxer Muay Thai fighter. But there was one point where Ankalaev landed 5 straight shots. Like you're playing a video game and someone's pressing the same button over and over. And also Ankalaev landed his own leg kicks too. Overall, a very impressive performance from him. And like you said, Alex Pereira's takedown defense was very impressive, but the striking, it just didn't look the same. He landed 15 kicks in the first round, but then things kind of started to slow down. If you had to make one adjustment for Alex Pereira here in this rematch, what would you do?
It's a great question. That's a great question. So there were a couple of problems that he had in this fight. One was getting his back off the fence. I think he has to work much harder for that. He is too conditioned to stay in control positions far too long. And through that, you'll notice that he surrenders the head battle in those positions where he lets the underhook, he'll overhook and then grab the wrist or, inside tie on the bicep or whatever, and then spread his base and then kind of just wait there. You cannot do that. And I think part of the reason why he's getting caught there is he's not being proactive enough. Anyway, for example, there was one double or one single that Ankalaev attempted, and before he even got to the fence, Poatan quickly turned, and that was really great, you know. But once you get pressed along the fence, I think doing a better job fighting the head, off balancing Ankalaev with any kind of various ties that you have, underhooking, turning him into the fence, like he had a very so for example, he would stop the takedown, right? But then he would, it was almost looked to me like he was so invested in like, I'm going to give it everything I have to stop the takedown, that there was nothing left that came after it. And my thought is, rather than holding onto the wrist, dude, you need to fire an underhook on that same side and jack it up and turn him into the fence. Now you dig underneath with your head position, you start firing, knees to the midsection or separate from there. And now he's still behind the black line and you're there. But that requires not just an adjustment that what you're asking for, I think, although it's that, it requires a bit of a change in your perspective. And then, you know, what kind of risks you're willing to take. I think he can do those things. And I think if he does, now you're changing the equation. But let me just add one more, if I may. I'm not going to go through it because I don't want to waste all your time. But he has to have an answer for the lead hand battle. So it was open stance, right? It's southpaw versus orthodox. What you saw was Ankalaev did a much better job, certainly than I had anticipated, based on how Ankalaev had performed in previous southpaw battles, or open stance battles, where he didn't used to control that lead hand very much, and you saw him here touching it all the time, or he would touch it and then move away, so it wasn't even relevant anymore. And Poatan couldn't get the jab going, couldn't get the jab to the body going very well, and certainly had no left hook. I mean, you got to get that cooking again, right? So you have to change the way your positioning works. You have to change your entries a little bit. You have to be a little bit more offensive, honestly, to kind of get that going. There's a few different ways you can make it more robust and abundant, but getting off the fence, I think, is going to be key. And then by re-engaging on the underhook and then turn, and then having an answer for the lead hand battle, those could make all the difference in the world. But he's got to get it done.
Yeah, it's fascinating because Anthony Smith actually brought that up when he fought him, that he kind of paws at that lead hand and kind of messes with your timing and stuffs up your rhythm when it comes to the way you throw your shots. And he's just really good at just kind of being out there and doing that throughout the fight, and kind of messes with you a little bit. And for someone like Alex Pereira, who doesn't actually have a traditional jab because that's not really his style of fighting, that could take out, the little sort of action that he would have had with that jab hand anyway. I also have a couple of theories on Alex Pereira about, when we watched that weight cut on Embedded, it looked like it was a real struggle for him. And Teixeira was talking about how he wanted to retire because he just couldn't do this weight cut anymore. I wonder with Pereira's age, the travel and everything, if maybe these weight cuts are starting to catch up to him. Obviously, he didn't look tired. But again, I wonder where he's at with these weight cuts. And finally, like you said, did he cram too much for the wrestling and not practice enough when it came to his striking strategy with Ankalaev? Maybe underestimated dealing with him on the feet, because Ankalaev is like this unconventional kind of underestimated sort of striking matchup, right? Where people don't think much of him, maybe like a DDP in a way, but you kind of have to prepare for him and do your homework. And maybe they just thought, hey, Pereira's just so good on the feet that he doesn't need to prepare for Ankalaev. You know what I mean? You just knock him out.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I definitely feel like Poatan, was he fully dialed in the preparation for this fight? There's an open question about that.
Well, dude, he was in Sydney for UFC 312. And no matter how much he talks about it, at 37 years old, making that flight back and forth and doing as many events down here as he did like back-to-back events here nonstop. Yeah. How is that good before your toughest fight?
Yeah. For anybody who's watching this who's 27, you're like, what difference does it make at 37? Look at me. All of it. All of it. That's what difference it makes. Now, again, Poatan is no ordinary 37-year-old. I'm just saying he also is still human. And he is human in a contest where, what he does for a living is a very thin margin for error. And you just got to be all the way locked in. And, again, I'm going to say this nicely, but I think it's an open question about whether he was all the way locked in for this contest. But, dude, we got to just say Ankalaev fucking looked good, man. Again, not overwhelming. But that, for example, that TP hit in round 2 where he sent Poatan flying backwards, I was like, whoa, okay, that's pretty good. And then there was a couple times where he would win the lead hand battle, and then he would stand switch through combination as he was moving forward. Shifting is essentially what they call it. And he would shift, and then he would land on Poatan totally unobstructed. Like Poatan couldn't read it and couldn't see it coming. And by the way, here's one advantage that I think he's going to retain in the second fight, no matter what. Ankalaev looked like he had faster hands and faster feet to me. He could get into and out of position more quickly, and he could reach the target, not quicker in the sense of, he had the shortest or the longest reach. Poatan had a 4-inch reach advantage, but Ankalaev could just had the snappier punches, the snappier kicks, and just had a little bit more fluidity. Poatan at 37 looked a little bit more rigid. He wins, again, when he can be more offensive and he can dictate timing. But he couldn't really dictate timing here, could he? And so he was at the mercy of the speed and the setups of Ankalaev, and it was a lot. It was a lot for him.
It was funny because in the corner, I think Pereira's corner was like, "You're faster than him. He's slow." And you're like,
I'm like,
wolf
no.
tickets.
He's got better timing, but he is not faster.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, Alex Pereira's striking game is so fantastic, but yeah, there are a couple of adjustments there. Just quickly, before we get off him, if he loses again to Ankalaev, what does that mean for Alex Pereira, in your opinion, and sort of this aura that he's created in the UFC?
I mean, I hate to tell people this, but, usually when you lose your belt, you don't get it back, or you can do it like what Izzy did, and you can get it back, and then you can lose it right then again. You know what I mean? Like once it begins to go, it tends to stay that way. I think folks should begin to recognize that. Also, I know that this is the preferred fighter of this generation of fight fans, and no issue with that. I mean, that makes all the sense in the world. But he is 37, and this is his second combat sports career, not his first. You also just have to recognize like kind of where he might be now. I think him losing would not be great. It would be the UFC having another diminished star. That would not, folks really misunderstand this argument. They think that when you lose, that when people like me say your star power is diminished, what we're saying is that people lose interest, in some kind of like enormous way, which is not the case. You're still in big fights. He could potentially win another really, really big and important fight. There's still lots of life left in him as a feature attraction. But it's not what it would be if he had the belt. There's all the evidence in the world. You can look at almost any UFC champion over time, and interest declines once they lose that championship status, even if they're still in, big fights that still matter to the public and by the way, still add to their legacy. So I think he could potentially go to heavyweight. There are other things he could do at 205. God only knows. He could maybe work his way. It's not like 205 is that hard to work your way up to a title fight again. That seems like something that could happen as well. So it's not the end, but I'm just trying to help people understand, like once that title gets broken from someone's hands in the UFC, it's not to say that they can't get it back, but more often than not, they don't. And even if they do, even that second hold, they can't usually keep it for very long. Rare exceptions to that. It's just MMA fighters do not last at their peak very long. You have to enjoy it while it is happening. That's it.
Good point, man. Just before we wrap, a couple more things. Speaking of legends, I want to bring up BJ Penn, man. I saw you retweeted an article from Kareem Zidane, an excellent journalist, someone that's been on the show a number of times, talking about some of the difficulties we've seen BJ Penn go through. I mean, we've seen it on the social media. I don't want to go into it too much, but there's been some really alarming stuff from him, saying things like, people are wearing masks and they're not who they seem they are, to an incident with his mother recently where he didn't believe it was her, and all sorts of stuff. It's not really spoken about too much, man, but like, what is your take on this situation, this difficult situation that BJ Penn has found himself in, that is kind of playing out right in front of our eyes on social media and throughout the internet?
I mean, this is not necessarily unknown to your audience, but it is worth reminding them that, I'm no medical professional. I'm not in any kind of way capable of making an appropriate medical diagnosis of what has happened to BJ. I can speculate about what he's got. I can speculate that I think probably taking untold amounts of head trauma has contributed to his current predicament. I do not know that, but that is my hunch. I can also tell the audience that I watched as a loved one of mine totally descend into madness. And it looks to me like there are great amounts of similarities between the situation that I suffered personally and what I can detect from this. It's not just that he doesn't recognize his own mother. He has been conspiratorial for quite some time. And in certain ways along, I don't know how I would say normal, but among expected kinds of political valence, but it has extended far past that, where he is now under the assumption that family members have been murdered, that people are trying to take everything from him. If you actually look at the language in his IG posts, they've gotten a little bit more. He used to never curse. Now you're seeing some of that has become more bombastic, and I think some of the imagery that he evokes has gotten, again, this is my assessment. I encourage everyone else to make up their own opinion, but it looks to me like it's increasingly violent. And I'm just going to say this. I don't know what is wrong with BJ, except to say that clearly something is deeply, 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 deeply amiss. And what I can just tell you from the situation that I suffered with a loved one who descended into madness, once they get there and they're starting to say things like they don't recognize the people around them, and there's like they're invoking violent imagery in certain ways, their situation, like they don't spend another 30 years doing this. Their situation, one way or another, again, in those other kinds of situations and the one I experienced more familiarly, they end. In the case of what happened to me, it was my mother, for folks who don't know, and she ended her own life. And I had to read her note, and her suicide note, and it was, she was not there, right? She was not there, unable to grapple with reality at all. I mean, totally inventing like conspiratorial fictions in her particular case as well. And then, by the way, that's always a telltale sign too, is to what extent they're invoking conspiratorial fictions about their own life. That's like major red flag. But you know, they can end in these things can end in all different kinds of ways. Even if no one else is harmed, there's still harm being done that affects family members, that affects that person, that, you know, I mean, there's the amount of harm that can be detonated in one of these situations is absolutely astronomical if relevant forces don't do anything. And I don't know if there is any. I don't know what the rules are in Hawaii. I don't know what the hell can possibly be done, but I would just really encourage people to look at the humanity of the situation. It cannot be the case that you can lose your grip on reality to this extent and it just carries on for 40 more years. That has not been my experience. I don't think the literature on the study of these kinds of things shows that. And I just don't think it speaks to everyone's common sense. You cannot live a world like that and it just carries on normally. So I really, 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 really hope, truly I mean this, he was my first favorite fighter, BJ Penn. He was my first one.
Do you have a favorite BJ Penn fight that just sticks out?
Yeah. A couple. If you guys don't, I mean, remember, I don't know if he was the first, but he was, I think, the second to win a title in a second weight class. And you know, when he iced Matt Hughes the first time, this was Matt Hughes at 170 at his peak. BJ goes up there having barely trained, rocks him with a punch, takes his back and chokes him out like it was nothing. Then left UFC, by the way, went over to K1 and started beating up on people much bigger than him. I mean, you could pick that one, dude. There was a time, I mean, people don't even fucking know. There was a time when, like, oh, BJ Penn kind of might be the guy at lightweight, and then there was like Takanori Gomi making a big to do over on the other side, and it was unknown, you know, who was really the top dog. And so Takanori Gomi, to his credit, goes over to Rumble on the Rock and fights BJ. Dude, BJ fucking abused this guy. He demolished him. It wasn't even fucking close. That was amazing. You could go to the choke to the back of Joe Stevenson. He had cut him open and then choked him so hard from the back, a geyser was spurting out of his forehead that was like a foot long, that was unmistakable. And every time you saw BJ squeeze a little harder, you could see the pulsating go even further. And then that's when he got up and then licked his gloves. I mean, dude, takedown of defense against Sean Shirk. Sean Shirk couldn't do shit to him. George St. Pierre got lucky with a win over him the first time, only because BJ didn't take it seriously. BJ Penn in the second Matt Hughes fight was like the first guy in MMA to hit octopus guard, which is only becoming popular now. The second fight with Hughes was like 15 years ago. Dude, when they called this guy the prodigy, this is why. The first American to win the black belt world championships in jiu-jitsu, got his black belt in 4 years. The game just came to him. It was effortless. He was a fighting genius. So it just makes this descent into whatever he's going into all the harder to swallow. BJ is, BJ Penn was beyond, dude. He was the standard of excellence when he was at his peak. You just couldn't imagine anyone fighting better than him at that time. And I watched it all, man, and it was special as shit. And so to see where we're at is tough.
Every time I take someone's back, which is very rare, I always think of BJ Penn and an excellent back control that he's got. As we wrap up, man, Luke, what's your problem with Kiss fans? Someone's written in, as a Kiss fan myself, there's nothing like Luke going on around about his hatred for Kiss and Kiss fans.
It's like asking me what do I have. It's like asking me what do I have against shit sandwiches. I don't know. They're inedible.
They're passionate. I'm not a big Kiss fan myself,
dude,
but they're passionate.
I mean, Kiss is the worst band ever. It's the worst band ever, right? To make money. I mean, there's been like bad bands at like, you know,
yeah,
open
what other
mics
worst
or whatever.
bands? I guess that is not one of the. I mean, it's kind of like a little bit of a contrived sort of money making machine.
Like, dude,
right?
People only know Kiss because they look like failed pro wrestlers at the local carnival. Not because they contributed anything musically that ever stood the test of time. If I had to ask people, like, you know, like what did Led Zeppelin contribute to music, you could easily answer this fucking question. You could, I mean, it's all different kinds of ways you could do it, right? You can even pick much more mundane bands than this. Dude, I could give a better answer to that question to Hootie and the fucking Blowfish than I could Kiss. It's just a bunch of absolute fucking dorks and losers. I sound like Colby Covington, making the worst music imaginable, all dressing up like failed pro wrestlers who didn't get the memo that they were fired by the local fucking carnival barker. Please burn the masters of any of their record catalogs. You will only make art better.
Love it. There is Luke Thomas, Morning Combat live chat. What's coming up this week, LT? What do people need to keep an eye out?
I have an announcement for March 17th, or I should say an announcement on March 17th. So nothing to plug, but check me out, which is next Monday.
Is that a live announcement? Are we going to make a whole thing out of it? What are we doing here?
I don't know if it, I mean, I'm not going to do a live broadcast, but yes, there will be an announcement at that time. Yes. So there you go.
Okay. Awesome. Love it. Luke Thomas joining Kiss. Thanks for joining Submission Radio. Second drama. I appreciate you, man. Make sure to check out the big announcement next week. One of the best in the game, Luke Thomas. Thanks for joining me, man.
Anytime.